Ever get the feeling that, like, trying to pin down warfare as, like, an art or a science, it's kind of missing something?
Yeah, it's way more complicated than that, right?
Totally, and that's what we're diving into today with Clausewitz's On War.
Which, by the way, it's crazy how relevant it still is. Talk about a book that stood the test of time.
No kidding. This guy Clausewitz, he was right there in the thick of it during the Napoleonic Wars.
Saw it all firsthand.
And he's not shy about telling you what he thinks.
Nope, he gets straight to the point.
He jumps right into this whole art versus science debate, and I love how he uses examples everyone can get. Building, mathematics, that kind of thing.
Yeah, building being the art, the actual doing, right.
Right.
And then you've got mathematics as the science, the knowing behind it.
Exactly. He really lays it out there.
And for him, this wasn't just some abstract academic exercise.
Oh, for sure.
Getting this distinction right was hugely important because back then, military theory was, well, it was all over the place.
Yeah, I can see that.
People were really wrestling with this question of whether war was like a structured thing you could almost predict or whether it was all about gut feeling and experience.
I mean, that's a pretty big difference.
Right. And you had folks like the condottieri. They were these Italian mercenary captains back in the day. They treated war like, I don't know, a trade almost.
Like a blacksmith or a carpenter, they just learn the skills.
Yeah, exactly. But Clausewitz, he saw that this whole approach, it had some serious flaws.
Yeah, if you're going up against someone who's not playing by the same playbook, that's not going to end well.
And that's exactly his point. Warfare, it's way too complex, way too unpredictable to just boil down to like a set of rules you follow.
Okay, so he's saying, hold on, it's not as simple as art or science.
Exactly.
So where does he go from there?
Well, he throws out this whole other way of looking at it. And honestly, this is where it gets really interesting. He calls it a clash of wills.
Okay, a clash of wills. I like the sound of that already. What does he mean by that?
So he's basically saying that war isn't just about physical strength, who's got the bigger guns or the faster horses. It's about the intellect, the strategy, the pure willpower of the sides involved.
So more of a mental chess match, too, on top of everything else.
Exactly. You could have the best weapons, the most brilliant plan, but if your will crumbles, if your resolve breaks, you've already lost.
Because it's about imposing your strategy, your intent on the enemy. But they're doing the exact same thing to you, right?
Absolutely, and that's what makes it so dynamic, so unpredictable. It's a constant back and forth, each side trying to outmaneuver and outwill the other.
This idea of a clash of wills, that has to be relevant today, right? I mean, if anything, warfare's gotten even more complex.
Absolutely. And, Clausewitz, he even goes so far as to compare war to things like trade or like what governments do, policy and all that.
Now, that's an interesting comparison. How does he tie that all together?
Well, he's getting at this idea that, like those things, war isn't static. It's not about following a script. It's about constantly reacting and adapting to what the other side's doing.
So it's about understanding the forces at play and being able to roll with the punches.
Exactly. He's saying you got to be ready to adjust your strategy on the fly, to account for new information, unexpected challenges, all within this constant dynamic interplay.
So it's not just about sticking to the plan no matter what.
Right. Clausewitz would say that's a recipe for disaster.
And he drives this point home in On War. With this line, he says, "War is no activity of the will which exerts itself upon inanimate matter."
Ooh, that's a good one.
What's he getting at there?
He's basically drawing this line in the sand between warfare and other fields, and it gets at what makes his work so relevant even today.
So instead of bridges and equations, we're talking about something way more unpredictable.
Way more unpredictable, yeah. We're talking about people.
And people, let's face it, we can be a pretty unpredictable bunch, especially when you throw in things like fear and courage and doubt, all amplified like crazy when you're in a life-or-death situation.
Absolutely, and Clausewitz gets that. He understood that you can't separate the human element from war.
You can't predict how someone's going to react under that kind of pressure. And those reactions, they could change everything.
And that's where his idea of friction comes in.
Friction. Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about that.
So Clausewitz, he's basically saying that war is inherently messy.
That it never goes according to plan.
Exactly. You've got plans going off the rails, communication breakdowns, things happening that nobody could have predicted. All this stuff, it's not just a minor annoyance. It's built into the very fabric of war.
It's like trying to plan a trip down to the last detail, but then a massive storm blows in and suddenly all your careful planning goes out the window.
It's that unpredictable element that you can never fully account for.
That's what they call the fog of war, right? That sense of confusion and uncertainty that's always swirling around.
Exactly. And Clausewitz would say that the best commanders, they don't just try to ignore the fog. They accept it.
They learn to see it as part of the terrain, so to speak.
Right. They understand that you'll never have perfect information, that unexpected things will happen, and that their ability to make decisions under pressure, that's what's going to make or break them.
It's like that saying, the enemy gets a vote. No matter how brilliant your plan is, the other side's actions, their reactions, they all play a role. You have to be ready to adjust.
100%. And this is where Clausewitz's emphasis on theory comes into play.
So he's not saying we should just throw out practical experience or gut instinct.
Oh, no, he knew those were important. But he's saying there's another layer to it. He wants military leaders to have this deeper understanding of the underlying principles of warfare.
So it's about learning from the past, studying history, understanding why things happen the way they did.
Yes, but not just memorizing names and dates. It's
Right.
about understanding the cause and effect, the motivations, the decisions that led to certain outcomes.
It's about being able to look at a situation and say, okay, based on what I know about history, about human nature, about how these things tend to play out, what are the most likely scenarios here?
That's exactly it. He wants us to dissect those past campaigns to see where those clashes of wills happened and to try to understand how things like personality, political climate, even just dumb luck, how all of that factored into the final result. Because if you can start to see those patterns, you can start to anticipate them, maybe even get ahead of them.
It's about developing those critical thinking skills. So you're not just reacting to what's happening, but making informed decisions based on a deeper understanding of the situation.
Exactly. And, earlier we were talking about how Clausewitz compares war to things like trade and state policy. Remember that?
Yeah, I do. He's saying that it's not just about the battles themselves. It's about understanding the bigger picture, right?
Exactly. Clausewitz, he was really tuned in to how interconnected everything is. He knew that wars don't happen in a vacuum. They're products of all these social, political, and economic forces.
It's like one of those cause and effect chain reactions. You pull on one thread, and it can unravel the whole thing.
That's a great way to put it. He's saying if you want to truly understand a war, you can't just focus on troop movements and which weapons are being used. You've got to zoom out and look at the whole context, the political objectives, what's going on with public opinion, the whole diplomatic chess game. It all plays a role.
So you're saying that war is as much about diplomacy and politics as it is about military strategy.
100%. And Clausewitz was way ahead of his time in understanding that. He knew that wars are fought for a reason, and those reasons, they go way beyond the battlefield.
And, thinking about our listener, someone who's living this military life every day, this has got to resonate with them.
Big time, because it's not just some theory, right?
Yeah, this isn't some history book thing.
It's the reality of what they're facing, the decisions they're making.
So how does this understanding of Clausewitz, this clash of wills idea, how does that actually help them navigate the challenges they're facing in the field?
I think a good example is, let's say you're a commander and you're planning an operation in a city, lots of buildings, civilians all around.
Definitely a complex environment.
Right. And you've got all this amazing tech at your disposal, drones, real-time intel, you name it. But even with all that, you can't escape the human factor.
Because you're not just dealing with data points on a map.
Exactly. You've got soldiers under your command, people who are depending on your judgment. You've got a civilian population caught in the crossfire. And you've got an enemy who's just as determined as you are.
So even the most high-tech plan, it's all for nothing if you don't factor in those human elements. The fear, the uncertainty, the potential for things to go sideways.
And that's where I think Clausewitz is really speaking to us across the centuries. He's saying, don't get so caught up in the technology that you forget about the human beings involved in all of this.
Because ultimately, it's about people. And that adds this whole other layer of complexity.
And it's not just about the people on the battlefield itself, right? Remember what we said about war being connected to all these other things?
The politics, the diplomacy, the whole 9 yards.
Exactly. Clausewitz never let us forget that war always has this political dimension. What happens on the battlefield, it ripples outward.
It has consequences, both intended and unintended.
And understanding that interplay, how military actions can shape political realities, that's crucial for anyone making decisions in today's world.
It's like Clausewitz is pushing us to think several moves ahead on multiple levels, not just tactically, but strategically. To think about how our actions might be perceived by different players, what the long-term consequences might be.
And to factor all of that in before you even give the order to engage.
It's a lot to consider. It makes you realize that there's no such thing as a simple solution in war, is there?
Absolutely not. Because winning a battle, it's not the same as achieving your overall objectives. And those objectives, they often involve a deep, deep understanding of the human landscape.
Diving into Clausewitz like this, it's been pretty eye-opening.
He really makes you think, doesn't he?
He does. And it just goes to show that studying war, truly grappling with all its complexities, it's not a one-and-done kind of thing.
It's a lifelong pursuit.
It's about constantly learning, constantly challenging your assumptions, trying to make sense of something that's so deeply intertwined with, well, what it means to be human.
Because at the end of the day, that's what Clausewitz is getting at, that human element, that unpredictable, messy, ever-changing reality. That's the constant in war.
So to our listener, out there navigating the complexities of military life, remember what Clausewitz taught us. War is more than just maps and maneuvers. It's a clash of wills, a constant interplay of human factors that demands both deep thought and decisive action.
Keep asking those tough questions. Keep seeking out knowledge. And never, ever underestimate the power of understanding the human element in every aspect of conflict.
That's what it means to be a true leader, and that's the enduring legacy of Clausewitz's work.